pleased, our final speaker, Michael Johns. He was a former White House speechwriter and Heritage Foundation policy analyst. He's a healthcare executive, Tea Party leader, and activist. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you all very much. Feel free to come on in because I know we're a little tight on audio. I want to start today firstly by thanking the Independent Salt Tea Party Association, Don and Terry especially, for their great leadership, in not just here in Philadelphia but throughout the 3 states of this area, New Jersey, Delaware, and here. They've been very successful in helping get great candidates into Congress and helping us fight Obamacare. We appreciate their leadership. I want to thank Congressman Mike Fitzpatrick, obviously, for taking the time to be here, for all the congressional and Senate candidates also for their support of this issue. We gather here today, 2 years after the passage of Obamacare, what some might consider a somewhat unusual time. We are here today, I think, to issue some reminders about the absolute horrific state of this legislation, how flawed it is, how fundamentally flawed it is, and then also about some of this Tea Party movement's victories, because this Tea Party movement has been at the core of holding Obamacare at bay. First, what has the Tea Party movement accomplished over these past 2 years with Obamacare? Well, let's start with the first obvious fact that we fired Nancy Pelosi. Remember when she somewhat arrogantly walked back to her congressional office with that big gavel in her hand, having stuck it to the American people who opposed that legislation? She no longer holds that gavel, and she no longer holds that gavel because, I believe, of this Tea Party movement and its vibrancy and its strength and its passion. Second, we've challenged Obamacare, and the good congressman's been a good part of this, with great legislation in Congress to defund Obamacare, to oppose its regulations, to ultimately, we hope, with taking back the Senate, to repeal it completely. This legislation is being challenged, as all of you know, in federal courts throughout this land, including the highest court in this land, the Supreme Court. That too is a tribute to this Tea Party movement that has been behind this litigation designed to resist Obamacare's unconstitutional provisions. I have brief time, so just let me try to summarize very quickly what is a hugely complex issue, but on which there is a very black and white solution, and that is that this is bad legislation. It was sold to us with misconceptions, with distortions, and with outright lies. Everything that Obamacare says it would do for America and Americans and its health care, it is actually doing the opposite. It promised increased access to health care, but it's in fact doing just the opposite. All of you know, in fact, there was the great prominent example of the Canadian Premier Danny Williams a little while back, that when people need access to quality care and need it quickly, they don't go to socialized medicine in Canada or in Europe, they come to the United States of America. That's a system, one of the great parts of this system, albeit not perfect, that is being decimated and destroyed under Obamacare. One example, Canadians, there was a survey done. 1/2 of Canadians requiring hip surgery are 50% are having to wait over 6 months for that hip care legislation. I read one of the letters that was actually written to some of the would-be patients who are about to have surgery, saying, if this patient has deceased in the meantime, please forgive us. That's the kind of system that is run elsewhere in the world, and it, believe me, is a common denominator in this legislation. Under that same survey, in no U.S. hospital in the United States has any patient for a hip replacement had to wait that duration of time. There are benefits to this system that need to be protected, and part of that is this fact that health care insurance means nothing if it does not mean access to quality care and expeditious access to that care. They promised us, didn't they, that Nancy Pelosi said, look, pass the bill. Famously, we all know this, pass the bill to know what's in it. 2 things have happened since then. Number one, the more the American people have learned, as Terry correctly pointed out in her introduction, the more they dislike this legislation. The more we learn about it, the more we dislike it. It's going to be at the core of this presidential campaign. Second is, we still really don't know what's all in it. In this 2,000 pages, a lot of which has nothing to even do with healthcare, is a lot of legalese that companies and state governments have been pleading with this administration. Please explain to us what it means. We're not fighting it. We want to comply with it. Explain it. This administration cannot answer the fundamental questions on Obamacare. They promised us next, didn't they, that costs would come down. Costs would come down, President Obama said. All right, what are the facts? Let's give you one example. With these new regulations, you have higher premiums being implemented in private insurance across this country. Celtic Insurance, just give you one example. This is an insurance company that does business in Wisconsin and North Carolina. They just increased their premiums about 18%. They were asked to explain what was that 18%? Where did those costs come from? They said 50% of that 18% premium increase was due to Obamacare regulations. President Obama promised you he would reduce healthcare costs. He is a core problem in increasing those costs. They promised also, didn't they, that we'd have a more insured America. The reality is that as they have imposed these regulations, private insurance is becoming more and more expensive, and more companies are failing to operate it, further increasing the burden on federal and state governments to provide health insurance. One of their most emotional pleas, the one that we probably had the most difficult time arguing with because it's a sentiment we all share, was that they were going to take care of dependents and children under Obamacare, and we needed to pass it for that reason. Okay, that sounded nice. We all support that objective. No one here argued with that. What's been the reality? Insurers in 34 states around this country are dropping child-only policies because of Obamacare. If you are concerned about increased health care coverage for children and dependents, Obamacare is bad for America. They promised, famously, remember President Obama's line, if you like your plan, you can keep it. Remember that? You see how many times he said that? Hundreds of times. Okay, we're 2 years down the road. What is the reality? The majority of plans in this country are not being grandfathered under the policy. You got 50 to 80% of small employer plans, 2/3 of individual plans, 2/3 of large insurer plans that are not being covered. And finally, while there are many objections, let me just deal with the issue of waivers. This legislation, I think it has to be, someone should look into this, unprecedented from the standpoint of now thousands of waivers that have been requested of this government to not have to comply with it. Many of them have been granted. But the reality is it points to the complete imperfection of this legislation. One of the greatest acts of hypocrisy, I think in our view and in the view of this Tea Party movement, is the fact that SEIU, the public sector union, one of the largest in this country, that was at the forefront out there saying we need Obamacare for America and for our children and for our health care, simultaneously behind all of your backs was applying for waivers to that coverage. Okay? This legislation is about politics, it is about big government, and it is about control. It is not about health care. Let me just conclude by saying, as I know that shared by all speakers today and by this great organization, this Tea Party movement has Obamacare up against the wall and on the defense. We've taken back the House of Representatives. We're committed to taking back the United States Senate for some great candidates here today. We're committed to supporting the president in 2012. Inevitably, the GOP nominee, whoever it is, in my view, is going to be clear-cut on the issue that Obamacare has to go. There's one final point, and that is, this issue has mostly been about a different vision, clashing visions for the future of our country, but it's not just about that. This issue is in federal courts and it is in the Supreme Court of the United States for a reason. And that is that even if you reject every fact that I've laid out, every argument against Obamacare that I've laid out, every argument that this Tea Party movement has laid out against Obamacare, there is nothing in the United States Constitution that allows the federal government of this country to require citizens to purchase a product or service that they do not want. Not maybe, not sorta, not let's have a hearing or a discussion. It is not permitted, and there is everything in our Constitution, starting with the 10th Amendment, that reserves those rights to the states or the people. And this is not just a policy matter, this is an issue of law. And I think I commend the Tea Party movement across this country, this great organization, and all of you for recognizing that fact as well. And thanks for all of your good support.
Bravo.
There will be a brief question and answer session. Anyone here in the press, if you have any questions for any of our speakers, please feel free to ask them now. Okay, that concludes our press conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you.